Dobry den. I'm very pleased on behalf of the U.S. Embassy to welcome our first ever, at least he's my first ever, artist in residence. He's literally in my residence on this trip, Wes Anderson. And as a special guest star, Wes's longtime cinematographer, Bob Yeoman, has joined us. Look at that, Bob. He didn't get a single hand clap, and the whole audience burst into applause when they learned you were here. We want to thank the Dean of FAMU, my friend Pavel, for the idea of putting this together, inspiring me to invite Wes back and Bob, who's been to Prague before, to come back again. Thank you.
That we're going to be shooting in January, and then we took another train from Berlin to Prague. What do you think of it? He's not as accustomed as I am to train travel. We did make a film on a train once, years ago. We shot a film together in India, and we spent probably a month living on that train.
And then we spent a lot of time riding around India in trains as well, just to kind of get the experience of doing that. So, but as far as riding the trains, I love the trains of Europe. They're really wonderful. The overnight trains, I'm not so sure about. They're not as comfortable as sleeping in a nice bed. So that would be my comment. But I do love the train system here.
So a mixed review from Bob, but from me, a pretty strong endorsement. Next question.
Yeah, not surprising because we always associate you with these romantic adventures, and just a little bit of your background. Because of the characters in your films, we're wondering, were you also prodigious as a child? Were you leading these adventures? Were you directing plays, making movies?
Well, I did do a lot of. I made little short films when I was a kid, and I wrote plays. But in a way, without me quite realizing, often the films that I've made have been sort of me making characters who live out the fantasies I had as a child more than the life I had as a child, even the problems that they have. In particular, this last film called Moonrise Kingdom, it's inspired by things from my childhood, but it's sort of inspired by all the things that didn't happen to me as a young person.
Ivan, do you have a question?
Well, I would really want to involve immediately the issue of collaboration of Bob and Wes, because since we really didn't expect to have both of you here. So I'm wondering, since you're working from the very beginning, from the Bottle Rocket feature together, how much did you build that unique style together? What was Bob's part in it, and how, since you never really broke that collaboration?
Yeah, should I start? Sure. Okay. An interesting thing is I didn't, when we made Bottle Rocket, that's a very, very long time ago, must be like 16 or 17 years ago or something like that. I really didn't know. I knew things about what I wanted in the frame and the sort of feeling of some lenses and things. I knew almost nothing about lighting, and I still don't know very much about lighting. I still struggled. Bob is always teaching me about lighting, and we just shot some tests in the last couple of days in Berlin, and we did lighting of every variety just to discuss it again. It's the same principles that we were using, but I'm still trying to understand them. So I feel like our collaboration has been me learning a great deal about photography from Bob. And then in time, I've worked with other directors of photography on smaller projects, and it's kind of shown me, it's brought into focus particular strengths of Bob's. I feel Bob is one of the best camera operators alive. And when I see somebody else try a shot, and they can't do it. And I know, here's how Bob would do it, and it would be a much simpler matter if only Bob were here. That's a few thoughts about Bob. You take it from there.
Well, thank you for that. I think it goes back to when we initially met on Bottle Rocket, and we had our initial meeting, and we immediately kind of hit it off, and we're drawn to the same types of movies, and we discussed things visually, and we saw things so much the same way that it was kind of a natural collaboration. And I think over the years, because we do see things so similarly, it's easier for me to shoot Wes's movies because I can kind of anticipate what he might like, and sometimes I can even anticipate where he'll want to shoot something. And those of you familiar with his style know he's a very distinct look. And so, having been there through all of his films, I can kind of know going into something, I think this is how Wes would like it, and sometimes I'm wrong, but generally I think I'm pretty close to what he has envisioned. And we spend a great deal of time, and we're in pre-production right now, so we spend a great deal of time going to locations and talking about how he would like to see things, and so that when we arrive with the actors and the crew, we pretty much have a pretty good game plan so we can work very efficiently.
And it was, sort of set in places that we knew, and I had a kind of preconception of what it was going to be like, and we sort of designed a lot of things for it. But when we actually started shooting it, and I saw the dailies, it looked nothing like what I expected. This combination of decisions that we had made, when they were added together, was a surprise to me. And that happens with sort of every movie. The thing I've learned over time is usually whatever combination I put together of my inspirations, when it's mixed, people can say, I can tell that's your movie. It just ends up, for some reason, being recognizable as me. And someone said, well, should I try to do something completely different? But as I've kind of made a decision. These movies are like me. That's my personality. If I want the movies to be, if I want to feel as close to the movies as I do, and just follow my own inspiration, then I feel like I shouldn't fight what makes it mine, and so I sort of embrace it. And in terms of going too far with that, I usually feel my own movies are suited to having more ideas, and if I have an inspiration and something I think could make the scene more interesting, I usually try to just add it and expand it, and they're always evolving. That's more or less my thought about it.
And that actually makes them watch it more and more, over and over, and get more of your world.
Well, that would be the best case scenario, yeah.
I really wanted to congratulate you on Moonrise Kingdom. It's a beautiful film, and I was very happy to see so many new elements of style, and in directing-wise, photography-wise. There's basically a black and white sequence, right, on the roof, which is the blue, the saturated one. There is the change of aspect ratio and also lenses, I think. So can you tell us a bit more on how did you make those decisions? Are you going to maybe bring them further? Is there a chance you'll be doing a black and white film or something like that? And this is a question kind of for both of you.
Yeah. Well, there were several things we were doing differently on that film. One is we shot it on 16 millimeter, which I had not shot anything really on 16 millimeter since a short film before we made Bottle Rocket. And that was largely, there were several things along the way. We did a lot of tests and compared different film stocks, and we found a good, slow, fine 16 millimeter film stock that the grain was not hugely noticeable, and we liked the amount of grain. And we found some cameras, these Aton, they're called A-minimas, these little tiny Aton cameras that you hold, that you can't even put them on your shoulder. They're designed to be held like a video camera. You hold them underneath, and when you hand hold these A-minimas, they're at the eye level of a 12-year-old. And I felt like the movie was going to be shot looking down at children, and we had lots of scenes with people of shorter stature. And we use these cameras all the time. We got 5 of them, and we tried to keep them all loaded, and we tried to make it where when one finished, you handed it off and you got a new one that was already loaded and ready to go. It didn't usually there was a technical problem with one of them or the other, and it wasn't quite as fluid as we wanted it to be. But that was a big part of it. The scene you talk about near the end of the movie that goes into it goes into black and white. Late in the process, when we spent a lot of time. It's a movie that's made very using old-fashioned methods generally, but the finishing is like every movie now, done digitally, and we spent a lot of time on that aspect of it, and that's it's a nice added kind of creative phase of filmmaking. So do you want to add something?
I just wanted to add about the 16 millimeter. Part of the decision was also we were shooting in the woods through some pretty remote areas, and I don't know if you guys have shot a lot of 35, but you have a lot of cases. It's a lot of heavy equipment. We had to lug up and down hills, and I think some of the thought was to make the cameras more mobile and be able to just pick up a camera and run through the woods, and the 16 was really perfect for that. And as Wes mentioned, we did do a digital intermediate in the post-production, and with the digital tools that you have available to you today, you can. A lot of people were even surprised the film was 16 millimeter. I mean, I've gotten that comment quite a bit, and I'm a big champion of 16 millimeter, and I would encourage all of you, if you haven't shot it, to try it out, because it's a wonderful medium that is gradually being replaced by digital. So try out the 16. I love it.
Many people here shoot on 16. We're still a film school. Very much so.
Excellent, very good.
But that leads to another question that on people's mind. Would you go digital? Would you make the whole film in digital? Can you imagine that in the future?
Well, yeah. I mean, I can assert. I mean, I've shot little things digitally. Bob and I have done some commercials together with Alexa camera, but I can't say that I'm tremendously excited about making a film digitally, and there's film is different, and my greatest inspirations tend not to be a movie I saw last year. They tend to be or even if I saw it last year, it tends to be a movie that's made many years ago, and I usually find my inspirations in movies from the past, and that's film.
I'd like to say too that the process of shooting digitally I find to be a very different process on the set than with film, and how we shoot our movies with Wes is he has a monitor but we don't record, and so Wes is there watching the monitor and seeing what we're doing, but there's no video village, there's no, like you would have, even you have it with film, but there's no slew of monitors behind us where everyone's standing there, and with the digital everyone is there watching this monitor, and it becomes a different process. So I think it's a more streamlined process the way we work, and I feel sad that it's gradually being replaced by digital.
Again, this is a place where film is still very highly regarded for many of the same reasons that you're mentioning. We're talking about the shooting process a little bit, and our students have a lot of questions about that. And Tomasz, do you have something regarding the shooting process, the work? In
the shooting process, maybe family is a big theme, the main theme of your films. Are you trying to create a family atmosphere also on the set? Make it friendly or open as possible, and not maybe as professional.
Yeah, well, yeah, I like that. The not as professional is a good way to describe it. Yeah, I like it not professional. I often find myself saying I don't want to do this because it makes me feel like we're professionals. I don't want to feel like a professional on a movie set. And the thing Bob has heard me say this a million times. When you start a movie that's, once somebody raises a few $1 million and you hire people who work in movies and are professionals, there's a tendency for the movie to take a bureaucratic shape like other movies. People do it the way they've learned it. And movies tend to get bigger. You tend to have more people working on them. And they get very organized in a way that's not particular to that movie. And I like to try to make the movie, I want it to be very organized, because usually we're trying to do something that's hard to do for the amount of, for the means and the time that we have. But I want it to be its own unique experience, and I try to kind of design our schedule and the size of our crew and our methods around the one movie. So I'm a big fan of non-professionalism, and I always say I want it to be like a student film, which is a struggle with when you don't have any educational institution to be a part of.
Yeah, I'd like to add, Wes does really strive to keep the crew size very small. And even on occasion at Moonrise Kingdom, we had our producer holding the boom pole. And we try to keep it just as few people around as possible.
But the union was angry.
Yeah, well, in America, it was unionized, and we did get in trouble for doing some of these things. But
it does occur to me, the thing I was just saying, we should have a school. I mean, then we could make the movies through the school. We'd be in charge of the school. We could say most of the money this year is going to my film, and the crew is sitting in this audience. We'll send you a schedule. I think that might be something worth contemplating.
Good idea.
Well, until then, you're welcome to be part of our school as much as you want.
You may be hearing from us.
Moving storyboard at the Moonrise Kingdom. Could you comment a bit on that?
Yes, of course. Well, that I think in my experience, this is I think probably very likely for everybody who works in movies. Every film I do, I get new people and new techniques and experiences that somehow go into the next one. And we've gathered, Bob has been working with me since the first film that we made, Bottle Rocket, but we've picked up people along the way. Our sound man, who's Polish, he started with us during a reshoot of Bottle Rocket, and so he's been with us ever since then. And our production designer, for instance, started on Darjeeling Limited, and he still works with us. The costume designer, Milena Canonero, is Italian, and she started when we did Life Aquatic in Italy. Frances Hannon, we have an English makeup artist who started during Rushmore. And then we have Key Grip, who's from India, who worked on Darjeeling Limited, and he's coming to Europe to work with us on this new movie and came to America. So we've got a crew of people that's grown over the years. The method you're talking about is something that came from doing an animated film. So when we made Fantastic Mr. Fox, I sort of saw the way people don't just storyboard; they animate the storyboards, and they do sound, and you put music on it, and it's something people have done even outside of animation for many years, but I'd never done it, and it was very inspiring for me, and so it's something that we've continued to do. Now, Moonrise Kingdom was, a significant part of the movie we have an animated cartoon version of it. The bad thing about it is, in the cartoon, I do all the voices, which is very strange. People don't really quite, they don't love it. But it's helpful to us as a shooting tool.
So regarding collaboration, you also have an ensemble that you work with. Actors quite often reappear. And we were thinking, what makes your films something? Where do you have some common ground with Czech cinema? And one is, at its best, Czech cinema often deals with sorrowful themes in a kind of cheerful way, which we could describe your films sometimes like that. And the other is that sometimes Czech films can mix stars with actors, with non-actors, and have them work very well together. So about actors, how do you work with your non-actors, your children, your movie stars? What's your approach to working with your actors?
Yes. Well, I see those things in the early Milos Forman movies in particular, and he worked with a lot of non-actors. And we were talking earlier about Taking Off, which is his first American movie, or as you described it, his last Czech movie. And that's filled with non-actors, and yet most of the central cast are actors we've seen in things. I find I've always, the first film I made had the cast was almost entirely non-actors. And I've always been comfortable working with non-actors and combining them. When we did the Royal Tenenbaums, we had lots of experienced actors, but in the one of the kind of relationships in the story was between a character played by Gene Hackman and a character played by our old friend who was a yoga teacher in Dallas. And the difference in acting technique between those two is probably the maximum ever achieved. And it was interesting because Gene liked Kumar is his name. Kumar and Gene had a friendship that formed quickly, and Kumar taught him some yoga poses. They did some meditation, and Gene liked him. And Kumar's the only person on the set who's older than Gene. And I think Gene liked that he wasn't the oldest person there, even. But he struggled working with an actor who doesn't really have the normal tools of an actor, and sometimes it would take time to get it figured out, and sometimes Gene would play a scene and he would feel like the other character was not reacting to it at all. But to me, watching the scenes, I thought it was wonderful because there was chemistry there, and I felt like it was Gene working with a real person, and only when he saw the finished film did he kind of concede, or he was actually very gracious about it, that he liked the two of them together. So anyway, that's just maybe the most extreme example of the actor-non-actor. These are the ones who know the script better than anybody, and somebody messes up their lines and he says, that's not, I don't think that's right. So yeah.
You addressed all these long scenes with a lot of blocking, and I'm wondering, since they're so complex, how do you keep the rhythm consistent? How do you prepare for such a shot? Can you tell us a little bit about your process with it?
Well, one thing is a long take with a lot of different activity. A long shot with a lot of, yes, anything like that. That's got lots of different elements. Usually, if it's a big enough one, it's kind of the day's work. You start the day with it. Usually, we've rehearsed it at least the day before. We arrive with everything built. The track is built and everything's ready, and we've already run through it on an earlier day with the camera to see how everything's going to line up, and then it's always at least 25 takes. No matter, in my experience, anything like that, you do it about 25 times, and you use take 22. And you steal a little piece of 25 that was the thing you didn't get right until the end. Almost always there's digital things that you have to, you try to, sometimes you end up using just the take, but sometimes you try to steal a little part of another take, and always the soundtrack has lines stolen from all the takes practically. That's sort of what it's like.
Now with the Tenenbaum show, there's a dog, and I want to ask, why are you killing dogs, or just hurting animals? Yes. Well, we never have done any actual physical harm to any animals in our films. We did have some mice that we drew on. I wanted to use a more natural system, but we ended up using just Sharpies to do dots on these mice, but they didn't seem to harm them. And the reason for the dogs, I think it's a psychological question, and if I knew the answer, I probably wouldn't do it anymore. I can't say exactly. So, are you planning any more dog killings and murders?
You've read the script, Bob. Is there anything?
No, this is kind to animals, I think, in this movie.
Good, I agree.
Okay, I'd like to open it up. Maybe have some questions from the audience. So there we have a question right here. I don't know who it is. Can't see you.
Hi there, my name is Lawrence. I know you like to work with like to work with the same people. Does the union allow you to do that?
Yes, he's saying, he knows I like to work with a lot of the same people. Does the union allow it? Yes. You know, the thing. I'm into unions myself. Bob's in a union. We've struggled with over certain things over the years. Like in America, the union didn't want Bob to operate. When we worked in certain states, when we worked in Texas, he could operate, but when we worked in New York, they said no. That's very frustrating because he's the best operator. And so we had somebody that we're paying. I don't like to waste any money. And he's not as good. And Bob is sitting there saying, you might try this. But the personnel, we've usually been able to use the people we want. And in fact, on the last film, the union was very helpful to us because we wanted to bring, there are key grips in America. It's hard to argue that you need one from India. And they let us bring him. And they let him work on the movie. And, it's a negotiation, but they were very reasonable and helpful about that.
Okay, anyone else? Yes, Valerio.
About your writing process, when you start working the story, how is like this initial trigger? Are you more like character driven by starting to write, or more situation, or is it more a theme? What inspires you to write a script?
Well, I think it may be a bit different with each one. This most recent one was the biggest thing I think was a character. I had an idea for a character, and I had a writer who I wanted to emulate. And the movie's really the result of combining those two things, taking this person who is somewhat like someone in real life and putting him in a story somewhat like the one I was interested in, but sometimes I feel the movies have come out of something very particularly from my own personal experience, and then one of them is made from a book, even so. They all start in their own way, and the one thing I found, I was reading an interview with Tom Stoppard, who's Czech, in fact, and he was saying how when someone asks him what the idea was behind something, he realizes that the idea behind everything he's done is always at least two things. It's this meets this, and that's the point of departure. And that rang true to me. I feel like everything I've done has been at least two different things. And often, halfway through it, I find myself saying, this would be a lot simpler if it was one of these things, and I'm trying to force something together. And yet usually I don't think I usually would end up with a script if I didn't have two things that I was somehow trying to force together.
Could you also tell us a little bit about your collaboration when you work with people like Jason Schwartzman or Roman Coppola, Noah Baumbach? How does that work?
Well, those guys, Owen Wilson and I started writing together, and for us, we had a very vague idea of a kind of story we wanted to do, but we had helped each other with short stories for many years. We were in school together, and we were both big readers and big movie buffs, but what we both wanted to be was writers or novelists, really. And we wrote short stories, not so many really, but that's what we were working on when we were in university. And when we made this first script together, we went in different directions, and it was quite dramatic at one point, and then it eventually became something that was more like a comedy, but not exactly a comedy, and that maybe had a lot of inspiration from things that we had really loved and sort of studied together without knowing we were studying. After that, I've worked with other people who are very talented writers, and Roman's a director, also Jason's an actor, and Noah Baumbach's a writer, director. With them, it's been more them helping me with my project. With Owen, it was us kind of, Owen and I together helped me figure out what sort of story I wanted to tell in the first place, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I see a question here.
Also, on the writing, like with such like a strong style in visuals, do you write for that style? When do you start considering like the style you want to shoot the film in? Like when you're writing, or is it like separate process?
Well, I don't know if I ever usually. There are things that you could say this is the style of the movie, but I'm usually not thinking about I might be thinking about sort of an atmosphere. Often when I'm writing, I'm thinking a bit about I'm writing something now that I don't know how we're going to do this. And sometimes it makes me pause in the writing and I start trying to figure out, and I will write it more with an eye towards how we might solve it. This movie we're working on right now is, there's a lot of traveling in it. It takes place in several different time periods, and there's a war looming, and it has things that are kind of a large scale, and yet it's not a very kind of genre type movie. And so I don't want to, I didn't want to go try to raise $50 million for it. We're making it for a smaller budget, and many of these things we've got to sort of figure out what is the trick that we're going to use to communicate this bigger thing, and that's what we're in the process of doing right now. And some of that happens in the writing, and a lot of it is happening with this animatic technique of kind of making an animated storyboard of the movie.
Yes.
One of my favorite things about your films is the soundtrack, and I was just kind of wondering, at what point in making movies do you decide upon this music? Do you Queen Bitch at the end of Life Aquatic, but did you always have that, you're going to kick into Slow Mo at that moment, or that comes later?
Well, that's interesting. With different films, I've had more plans for the music than others. This last one was very. The music was the last movie has a lot of Benjamin Britten music, and that was very. That was a big part of the. That's in the script. And as we made these little animated things, we always had the music in it, and it's sort of shot with a sense of how the music fits into it. With other ones, the Royal Tenenbaums, for instance, there's lots and lots of music in that movie that's we figured out in the editing room. And I do find in most of my movies there's music sort of all the time. In this last one, I think there's just I don't know if you could find, I don't know if it can add up to 3 minutes of the film, and I don't think there's ever 30 seconds without music playing. So it's a big part. At the end of Life Aquatic, that was something I had planned for a long time. It's in slow motion in the movie. We shot it normally, and we digitally made it slow motion, which was not as good. And normally we would have shot it in slow motion. I didn't want to. I felt like every movie, I'd done 2 movies in a row that ended with a slow motion shot. This one I had a shot that was supposed to be a slow motion shot. I shot it without doing the slow motion because I thought I'm repeating myself, and I should have just repeated myself because I was going to anyway. So that's the answer to that.
I'll ask one more question before we go to the others. Some people were wondering, because there was this, what did you learn from your first film, Bottle Rocket? We know there's a story behind how you got that film. Because there's a big jump. I love Bottle Rocket myself, but it is clear that then you're really going to Rushmore. That was your big step. So, what did you learn from making that first film that you can pass on to other people here?
Well, so many things, but I think in a way. One of the biggest things was this will sound obvious, but I realized during the movie that I could never be I could never relax. I could never say, well, this one's good enough, or I just had to that you have to keep in mind this is your chance to do it. Now is the moment. Your stamina has to hold up until it's finished, and afterwards you can rest. But during that movie, there were times when I was tired, and I, sort of said, I think we can make this work. And I don't do that anymore. I didn't do that when we did Rushmore. And I think the other thing was I had a better sense of, the schedule for the movie is whatever it is, 45 days or something. And if you are very, very focused with what you do during those 45 days and you shoot what you need and you put your time into what is going to go in the movie, it's a much better thing. Than Bottle Rocket, we shot a lot. We shot a shorter time than Rushmore, and we cut out 30 minutes of the movie, which means really the Bottle Rocket that we finished was probably shot in 20 days, and it would have been nice to have 35 days to shoot what's actually in the movie. That's a couple of things anyway. Yes, he's asking about Buñuel. Buñuel is one of my favorites, and really for me, I think he's one of my biggest influences and biggest inspirations, because Buñuel made film after film for many, many years that are all his. Somewhere he adapted some films, particularly earlier in his career, and he worked in different places. But at a certain point, he had the thing that he wanted to do, and he just followed that. And he was always true to that. And his films you can instantly identify a Buñuel film, and you can't really describe. You can try to describe a Buñuel film, but it's a combination of so many things that's so singular. It's easy to describe something else and saying it was like a Buñuel film. That describes many. That puts many qualities on something when you say it. That Criterion list that you're referring to. That was just Criterion movie. The last 10 Criterion movies I'd watched and had written to them about. But Buñuel is certainly at the top of my list. And I read somewhere an interview with Mike Nichols where he said, I think of Buñuel every single day when I'm working. Some scenes in Buñuel films, when you're struggling to make a script work or to make a scene work, and then you realize there's someone who, in the middle of at any moment, can say, now I'm going to tell a dream. That has nothing to do with anything else, and he'll take a detour like that, and something about his way as a director, you're taken by the hand, and you accept it, and you go with him in that direction. It's a special thing.
Okay, we're coming close to 2 o'clock. That was actually an alarm. Do we have more time, Mr. Ambassador? That's the... Yes.
Sure.
Okay. We have time for 2 more questions.
2 more questions, and that's an official number.
Okay, so one will be from Tomasz.
I have a personal question. I sometimes steal little things, and it makes me in a better mood. And that theft is a big theme of your movies. So have you ever stolen anything, or where did it come from?
Are we talking about
just little things?
Ideas or shops? Or are we talking about shoplifting?
Shoplifting.
Shoplifting, I think that's saved for a later conversation. When we know each other a little better and there's 450 fewer people in there.
Okay.
Let's still do 2 more.
Yeah. I'm just wondering if you're aware, and how does it make you feel to know that most of these guys here and the future generations of filmmakers are really influenced by your work. So, how do you cope with that?
I feel that's. I can't even accept it. It's sort of too flattering, and when I feel some kind of homage from someone else who's doing what I do and what I always wanted to do, that lifts my spirits enormously if they happen to be down. I know I'm so deeply influenced by so many different artists. Artists take a very special place to me in my life. For me, that's very moving, and it's sort of my dream.
Okay, I see a young lady in the back.
She's asked about animated film. Why did I do an animated? Was it harder or easier? How did I do that? Well, I've always loved stop motion animation, which is sort of particularly grounded in this part of the world, I think. I've always been drawn to sort of a quite handmade kind of feeling of filmmaking, and stop motion in a way is the most handmade filmmaking that exists, really. I mean, it's all done with hands. I was interested in the stop motion that would have the kind of textures that are kind of old-fashioned, I guess. The experience of doing it was in some ways the most. It had the biggest impact on my approach to filmmaking of any of the films I've done, at least since the first one, and it was very exciting. A lot of work I did. It took many years to make this film, and the film evolved significantly as it went along. I started thinking we had a finished script. And I said that our great advantage is we have a finished script that we're just going to shoot. And everyone told me it changes. And they were right. It changed continuously. And we made it, and I think we made it better as we went along. I liked the experience of having many shots going simultaneously and being able to slowly shape them and sculpt them. And also I enjoyed working with animators because these are people who are just moving around puppets, and yet two people doing the same scene with the same puppet will something completely different about their personality comes through it in their performances. They're like actors. And that was something new for me and something exciting. I feel like animation is filled with metaphors for live action filmmaking. Yes, it was very exciting. That's it.
So, yes, that's it. Mr. Anderson, Mr. Yeoman, Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for visiting FAMUFEST.
Thank you so much, all. Thank you. Thank you very much. That was great fun.